Hi, I'm Arun George, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express News Show. On this episode, we're going to decode what caused mutual fund firm Franklin Templeton to close multiple schemes and resulted in the Reserve Bank of India stepping in. We will also look at the impact the COVID-19 pandemic has had on the sporting world. But first, we look at what happened in a meeting between the Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chief Ministers of States on Monday. The nationwide lockdown to slow the spread of COVID-19 ends on the 3rd of May. And on Monday, Prime Minister Narendra Modi met with chief ministers from across India through video conferencing. The agenda: how to emerge from the economically crippling lockdown. Deeptiman Tiwari, who covers the Home Ministry, joins us to talk about what happened at the meeting and what to expect after the 3rd of May. Hi, Deeptiman. To start with, what were the key highlights of the meeting that happened yesterday?
Basically, all the states and the Prime Minister discussed what is going to happen after May 3. We have already had one lockdown extension, and we are still struggling with containment of the disease, the epidemic. And now the future course of action after May 3 is to be decided, because not only are the containment efforts still on, and we are still procuring equipment, and we are still not graduated to doing large scale testing in the country. But at the same time, due to almost by May 3, we'll be covering 40 days of lockdown. Our economy is suffering massively. States are not getting any revenue, whereas expenditure is increasing. Nobody knows how to handle this. So obviously, the main focus was as to how to kickstart economy now, because if economy is not restarted in some or other measure, we might have a bigger disaster on our hands than Corona can unleash, actually. So most states in the PM and CM's meeting today were basically with the center as far as COVID containment measures are concerned, and said that they would continue to implement guidelines released by the center. But they said that in such zones where there aren't any cases of Corona, or in such districts and areas where the cases are very less, like less than 10, less than 5, we have to prepare a roadmap for opening of the economy, for business activity to restart. So that was basically what was discussed in the meeting today. Some of the states, such as Meghalaya and a couple of other states, such as Odisha, were in favor of extending the lockdown. However, in what measure, we don't yet know. At what scale these lockdowns will be extended. Some states have already announced that they will extend the lockdown in severely affected districts of their states. So the basic consensus which is emerging out of this meeting is that let's extend lockdown in hotspots and containment zones. Let's free up other districts so that economic activity can begin to happen and lives can return to normalcy. Issues of migrants were also discussed, and it is being expected that very soon there will be a roadmap which will be drawn for extraction of stranded migrants in various states, because it is becoming difficult for states to sustain them there, and these people are also suffering for lack of money and proper place to stay. And there are reports of migrants going hungry and getting agitated. So that is going to happen, as we already know that UP has already begun to extract migrant laborers belonging to the state from other states in buses. So that sort of a thing is going to start. We might see some bit of a interstate movement. However, it appears that some sort of restrictions may continue to remain on large-scale interstate movement of trains, although they may not remain completely banned, but some sort of restrictions may remain.
So, Diptiman, you spoke about how railways is going to open up maybe partially. Some airlines have also started considering taking bookings from May 4th. Is there any clarity on exactly how much and how much will open up post May 3rd?
We don't yet know exactly how much it will open, because that roadmap will have to be decided by the National Executive Committee, which is headed by the Home Secretary in the Ministry of Home Affairs. Obviously, all states will be consulted, and perhaps Cabinet Secretary and Home Secretary will consult Chief Secretaries of all states, and a roadmap will be prepared. It is also being said that perhaps post May 3, as far as extension of lockdowns and some other measure is concerned, states will be given more freedom. It is being expected, will be given more freedom to denote containment zones and how to open economy in certain zones which they feel are less of a risk. So we don't yet know at a national scale how movement of people will happen and to what scale. However, we can hope that there will be some restrictions, but largely interstate movement will be allowed, albeit there will be strict guidelines for social distancing. So we are unlikely to see packed trains moving from one state to another. However, how this will be ensured is yet to be seen.
So you spoke about how, there's this states are going to be allowed to make more decisions of their own, how to ease lockdowns and things like that. But just say this weekend, there was this notification that came out that some shops can be open, some shops can't. And that turned out to be a major source of confusion between the center and states. Has even that been resolved yet? Do we kind of know which shops are open and which aren't?
See, the order that Ministry of Home Affairs issued late on Friday night said that shops which are registered under the Shops and Establishment Act in cities and are not part of some market complex will be opened. Now, this means that all sorts of shops, whether of grocery items or essential items or of non-essential items such as clothes or other sundry items, electronic, AC, fans, whatever, anything that you can imagine, they can open, but they should not be in a market complex. Now, that is something which has really led to a situation where in cities, hardly any shops have actually opened despite this order. Because you see, there are 2, 3 difficulties in this. One is that in cities, you will generally find shops in market complexes. You have very few shops which are standalone. Now, the order says only standalone shops in cities can open. So you're talking about that there should be a shop around which there should be no other shop. Now, there are very few such shops in cities. 2, it says in residential complexes, the shops can open. Now, those shops are already open. And these are generally largely grocery shops. You're unlikely to find an air conditioning store in your residential colony. So, this is one of the problems. Second problem is that how are people going to travel to their shops? Because there is a lockdown. People are not allowed to go. So, there'll be this logistical difficulty of giving everyone passes. So, what you're going to see is that by the time this thing is resolved, probably you would have reached May 3. In rural areas, all kinds of shops have been allowed, barring malls and liquor stores, which are also banned in urban areas because they come under a different act called Excise Act. So, in rural areas, also, people are still struggling to decipher to what extent what can open. For example, just the second day of after releasing that order, the Home Ministry had to clarify that, okay, fine, barber shops cannot open because they provide services. So these kind of things are still happening. There is a lot of ambiguity about what orders the Home Ministry is issuing. And this is not a case only with the Friday order. This has been a case throughout. In the first phase of lockdown, if we see after Ministry of Home Affairs issued guidelines on March 24, within the first week, it had to issue 6 addendums and clarifications. Addendums were issued because it had forgotten to add certain items. Clarifications were issued because its guidelines were so ambiguous that people who were implementing on the ground could not understand it. So it had to issue clarification after clarification, addendum after addendum. It was believed that in the second lockdown, the center would have learned from its mistakes and probably would have a wider consultation with stakeholders and then issue guidelines. But what we saw is that despite Prime Minister giving almost 5 days before the lockdown extension kicked in on April 20, there was a lot of confusion. Despite these 5 days, the new guidelines were not totally understood by the states. There was chaos on the roads. There was chaos in markets. Then the problem was that some states interpreted it in a manner that they gave more relaxations than the center intended. Then center had to issue, for example, the state of Kerala. It allowed bookstores to open, barber shops to open. It allowed buses to ply within cities for short distances. Then the center warned the state, short of a letter to the chief secretary saying that these are dilution of national guidelines and you cannot do this under Disaster Management Act. Now, another thing to understand in this, that what appears to be on the ground is also some sort of a differential treatment of states. Like, for example, while it forced Kerala to take back its relaxation on flying of buses, it has maintained complete silence on how UP is extracting students from quota, that too in buses across several states. It's not even within a state. Now, UP has also begun to extract migrant workers. So whether this is a violation of national guidelines or not MHA is saying nothing. Now, similarly, the center allowed e-commerce to start business at full scale, which means even delivering non-essential items. Then within 2 days, it had to revoke the decision under pressure from small traders and their associations. Similarly, industry players expressed fear that given that there were provisions of penalty in the guidelines for violation of COVID containment measures, they feared that if anyone in their premise after restarting of their factory units was tested positive for COVID, they could be prosecuted. Then Ministry of Home Affairs first issued a clarification that okay, only if it is with the connivance of the employer or with the negligence of the employer will be prosecuted. Now, this hardly was of any comfort to the industry players. Then Union Home Secretary had to issue another clarification that there is no clause in the guidelines that anyone tested positive on a factory unit, the employer will be held responsible or prosecuted. However, we must remember that all these industry units must be having legal divisions which must be read the laws. And in the Disaster Management Act, it is clearly mentioned that if the guidelines are violated in any manner, it will be determined by the local authorities and they will have complete freedom to prosecute the employer. So these are some of the practical problems the center does not seem to have thought of. And it does not seem to have thought of it's because it has not done adequate consultation with the stakeholders, which means states have not been consulted properly, industry heads have not been consulted properly, traders have not been consulted properly before coming up with these guidelines. So, there is complete lack of coordination between different players in this entire COVID containment arena. And that is why we are seeing these kind of problems that despite certain decisions being taken by the center, it is not being implemented on the ground. So that is one hurdle that probably the center has to cross, having adequate consultation with states, having adequate consultation with other stakeholders such as industry heads and traders. And then probably we will see a smoother implementation of both lockdown guidelines and COVID containment measures.
Here's something you hear at the end of every mutual fund advertisement.
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
But investors in 6 fixed income and credit risk fund schemes in India discovered how true it could be when global financial firm Franklin Templeton announced on the 24th of April that it was shutting these schemes. With a value of 30,000 crore rupees or $4.1 billion, the decision sent shockwaves through the economy and stock markets. After regulators raced to reassure investors about the mutual fund industry, the Reserve Bank of India on Monday announced a special liquidity window of 50,000 crore rupees to bail out mutual funds hit by the turmoil in the debt fund segment. We are now joined by Ishan Bakshi from the editorial team, who writes on economy and finance, to discuss what happened and how the RBI is trying to help. How do you explain what these Franklin Templeton schemes that were shut were?
So basically, the debt schemes of mutual fund houses, and there are several across all mutual funds, they invest in short-term debt, long-term debt, medium-term debt of governments, of corporate houses. So corporate houses who are looking to raise short-term debt in the market, they'll issue a paper which the mutual fund houses will subscribe to. Now, what has happened in this particular case is that there are two things that are happening right now. So first, you had a lot of investor redemptions. So basically, whoever had parked money in these schemes wanted money out. And we've seen this over the last month, ever since the lockdown announcement came in. A lot of investors are withdrawing money. Now, when you are withdrawing money from a fund house, the fund house needs liquidity in the system to give your money back. So it can do two things. It can sell what it owns, which is bonds in this case, or it can borrow against those bonds. Now, given what's happening in the economy right now, the disruption in economic activity due to the lockdown, the debt market in India has become slightly illiquid, and especially for lower rated securities. And when your debt market is illiquid, you cannot find a buyer, you find it difficult to find a buyer to sell those securities. So where Franklin Templeton and other fund houses perhaps, I don't know, but where Franklin Templeton is struggling was to probably offload the securities in the market so that it can raise enough cash to meet the investor redemption requirements. This is what essentially forced it to shut those schemes.
In a normal scenario, you're saying something like a Franklin Templeton would buy these securities, hold on to them, and once those companies that have borrowed the money, they pay them back with interest, Franklin Templeton in turn gives it to an investor.
Right now, the situation is you have no buyer in the market, right, for these securities. So if Franklin Templeton needs money right now to give its investors who want their money back, Franklin Templeton has no buyer in the market who's willing to pay for whatever the security is worth. Obviously, if Franklin Templeton goes and does a fire sale, say argues for the sake of argument that I will sell this 100 rupees security for 50 rupees, there might be some takers, but then you're taking a capital loss, right? So that is also the situation right now. There aren't enough buyers who are willing to buy the security for Franklin Templeton.
So, we had a report about how the funds that were invested were put into unrated or low credit schemes. Is that a normal thing for such schemes?
So we have an investment grade of schemes, right? You have your AAAs, which are supposed to be the most safest, the securest. Then you have AAs, you have A's, and so on and so forth. So most fund houses, what they do, they have certain limits. So a fund house, a particular scheme of fund house will say have a mandate to invest 60% of its funds in AAA. Or some will say that you invest 15% at least in AA. So you have to understand that the lower rated schemes that you invest in, the more the yield is. So a AAA bond will give you less yield, although it is more secure than a single A bond or a BBB bond. So a BBB bond will be more attractive from an investor point of view because it will give you more returns, but it's also more risky because the company has a lower credit rating. So most fund houses, most debt schemes of fund houses have a mix. And that mix is of securities, and that mix in turn is dependent on the scheme's mandate. So in this particular case, it would seem that a significant share of the fund corpus was invested in lower rated securities. Why? Because these securities give you a higher yield, which is what was attractive to investors.
So with all the reports that have come in, Ishan, there's been a lot of questions raised about the kind of investments that were made in these 6 funds. What would you have to say about that? I mean, is there something that would raise eyebrows normally in the investments?
There's no denying that they were invested in more risky assets, more lower rated paper than some of the supposedly safer debt instruments right now. This is not to say that this was not fulfilling a market function, because it was ultimately channeling money to some corporates, right? So it is all part of market making. Now, to the extent that investors thought these schemes to be completely risk-free is the perception problem, right? Because every investment carries an inherent risk. Even a AAA rated paper may carry a certain inherent risk in the paper, right? But to believe that all these papers are risk-free is wrong. And this is where the inherent perception comes into play of investors.
So what happens to investors in these schemes? Do they get to redeem their holdings or do they have to wait?
So investors now will have to wait until Franklin finds buyers for its securities. Investors will have to wait. Now, it all depends upon how this lockdown is lifted and how economic activity restarts. So at the core of the issue, right, is the worry of investors that I'm not going to get my money back. That corporates who've taken on loans will not be in a position to service their debt obligations because of the lockdown and because of the loss in revenues. So once you start getting clarity on these issues, when the lockdown is going to be lifted, is it going to happen in a gradual manner? What will the impact be on companies' revenues? How will they meet their interest obligations? So on and so forth. Once you start getting more clarity, people will start coming back to the market, and then probably you'll find buyers for these securities. And after that, only can investors hope to get repaid. It may be the case that investors are made completely good. It may not be the case. Some investors may have to take a loss. But we'll have to wait and see how the situation evolves.
So after Franklin Templeton shut down these 6 schemes, they shut down another bunch of schemes. So why did that happen?
So ripple effects, right? They see the exact information is not available in the public domain to the best of my knowledge. But what happens is there's a risk aversion, right? So put yourselves in the shoes of an investor. You have a scheme of a fund house which shuts down. You have more money that is parked in other similar schemes. The first thing you will do is try to withdraw your money. There's a certain risk aversion that steps in, that creeps in, right? For both investors and for fund managers. So this is what kickstarts this vicious cycle. Both fund managers and investors become risk averse. Investors want their money in their hands, and fund managers then want to move out of less liquid assets to more liquid assets, right? The more higher rated. So this sort of sets off a vicious cycle.
So, Ishan, how much does this hurt the industry, the mutual fund industry? And can we expect to see this from other fund houses that have similar investments?
So if you look at what I was saying before, this will be the start of a cycle of risk aversion. I, as an investor, if I park 100 rupees each in 10 fund houses, in 10 debt schemes, I will panic and I will try to withdraw. This is where AMFI and other regulators and other regulating bodies are trying to step in to stem the panic, to say that most investments are in liquid, highly rated bonds. So you want to calm the panic, avoid it from spreading.
The RBI has announced a move to have more than 50,000 crore rupees for mutual funds. How much does this help in cases like this?
What RBI has done today is essentially given a liquidity boost to mutual fund houses. So in the case of Franklin, it did not have that much access to liquidity to meet the redemption pressures, right? So now what RBI is hoping is that through this provision that they have done today morning, there'll be enough liquidity for mutual fund houses to meet their immediate redemption pressures. This is what they're hoping will calm the market and reduce the panic. That is what they're hoping through this measure.
So just to explain how the RBI's move is, does it mean that the RBI will directly lend to mutual funds, or will mutual funds take it out of banks?
So the window that has been opened right now is via banks. It's similar to what the RBI had planned through the pre-targeted long-term repo operations that it has been conducting over the past few weeks. So the point is whether banks will lend now, right? Whether banks will take part in this RBI liquidity facility and lend to mutual funds. Now, if you look back, when this announcement of Franklin Templeton shutting down the 6 schemes came in, on that day or the day before, I'm forgetting right now, there was a RBI operation that was designed to channel liquidity to NBFCs and the smaller NBFCs. It was on Thursday, if I'm not wrong. And that was not fully subscribed to by the banks. What that essentially tells us is that banks do not want to take on the credit risk in the economy. So whether this facility that they have opened for mutual funds will be as welcomed or not welcomed by banks is something we'll have to see. But it would seem that banks are being extremely risk averse right now. Despite there being a lot of liquidity in the system and despite this situation, nobody wanting it to spiral out of control, banks are being very risk averse at this moment. So it's only when we start seeing the results of this operation of the RBI will we understand to what extent liquidity is flowing to the mutual fund industry.
And finally, we talked to Mihir Vasavada from the Sports Desk, who is also the co-host of the Express Sports podcast. He talks to us about just how badly the world of sport has been hit by the lockdown and when we may see a live match next. Mihir, in the pandemic, one major sector that's been hit is the business of sports. Just how bad is the situation in India?
It's terrible. Like everything's just come to a complete standstill. Most affected is obviously cricket because this was the season when the IPL is generally held and all other sports come to a halt. So right now, as you know, the BCCI has indefinitely postponed the IPL. It is possible that the season can be held in October, November if, the other cricketing calendar is adjusted around it. Apart from cricket, all sports have come to a halt. The Olympics, which were to be held in July and August, since they are postponed by a year, all other athletes and other sports, not much basically happening. All the athletes are at their home or at the training center and they're not allowed to train as well. So everyone's just home waiting for things to get normal and return to training.
So Mihir, do you kind of have a sense of how the financial impact is in that sense with all the sports being shut down?
With regards to IPL, the losses, if the season is cancelled altogether, would be in the range of around 2,500 to 3,000 crore. And basically, it might have a ripple down effect on the entire cricketing ecosystem, not just in India, but also abroad, because a part of the player fees is also paid to that country's respective association. So, for example, if there is an Australian player in the league, his association also gets a cut of the player fee. So, a lot of federations do make revenue from the IPL. Now, if that's not held, obviously the losses will trickle down to every other aspect of the sport. And it's not just IPL. I mean, if you look at cricket overall, all events, all matches have come to a halt. There have been reports that Cricket Australia is on the brink. They don't have finances to run the entire year. And it's true for a lot of other nations as well. If we talk about non-cricketing sports, obviously in football, for example, world football is looking at losses which run into billions around, estimated is around $5 to $7 billion from all the leagues that have stopped and the broadcast revenue and the sponsorship money that's subsequently not paid right now, or rather not paid, they'll have to return if the matches are cancelled. So that's about football. You have come across reports where a lot of smaller sports like sailing, for example, sailing has asked the International Olympic Committee for a bailout because they have lost out on the revenue since the Olympics are postponed by a year. And similarly, sport like hockey, which also depends a lot on the International Olympic Committee, they are also likely to ask the International Olympic Committee for some kind of financial package.
So earlier this week, Mihir, you did this very interesting interview with Simon Chadwick where he spoke about how only the biggest leagues in the world would survive post the lockdown. So maybe an IPL will survive, maybe an EPL will survive. So who does that put in the firing line in India? Like, what are the sports that are really going to be hit as a result post lockdown?
So it's not necessarily sport. It is also the smaller teams, the smaller leagues. It's everyone. If you look at what happened after the 2008 financial crisis, a lot of smaller football clubs had to shut shop. For example, AEK Athens, which is one of Europe's elite clubs, they had to declare bankruptcy and start all over again in the third division of the Greek league. And you saw similar stories playing out in all continents. In India as well, you saw a lot of football clubs shut down after the 2008 financial crisis. In India, we saw clubs like Mahindra United, later on clubs like Dempo, etc. So you saw a lot of impact in that sense. One of the things that Mr. Chadwick did say in his interview was 2008 financial crisis moderated the behavior of a lot of sports and a lot of leagues, in the sense that the money that was mindlessly being splurged on sports, there was some sort of correction in terms of player salaries and sponsorship amount. What 2020 will do, Mr. Chadwick says, is the financial crisis that is expected that a lot of countries are already facing because of the coronavirus crisis. He believes that it will not play as a moderator, but it will be the eliminator, in the sense that it might completely wipe out smaller sports and smaller leagues moving forward. And we just refer to sports like sailing and hockey. These are the sports which might face a lot of heat in the coming months.
So given that, can we picture, Mihir, when's the next time we can expect to see live sports now?
Live sports is... it's a question that's on everyone's lips. The European football leagues, they are trying extremely hard to get it up and running sometime in June. Those matches, if at all they're held, they'll be played without spectators and in a scenario where all the players, support staff, and whoever is in the stadium will be first tested for coronavirus. Cricket, we still don't know. The IPL, obviously, they're trying to have it in the October window. Also collides with the World T20 Championships. Now, Australia, they were considering a 6-month travel ban. So if that comes into effect, then the World T20 won't be able to take place, which is scheduled right now for September. So that won't take place, and then IPL will be possibly held around that time. A lot of other international sports like badminton, hockey, basketball, etc., there is a strong possibility that the competitive events where there will be ranking points on offer, where there will be serious competition, it's likely that they won't return till January 2021 or until there is a cure or a vaccination ready for it.
You were listening to Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show, as always, was edited and mixed by our producer Joshua Thomas. If you like the show, then do subscribe to it wherever you get your podcasts. Leave a rating or review. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet to us at Express Audio and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.